Hello everyone, and I am just very happy to be back in Istanbul and at Koç University, and want to give a big thanks to the Office of International Programs. That's right, isn't it? Office of International, okay. Because every time I come, I always talk about hospitality. N of one, I feel that I'm treated so well always, and I thank everyone who's made this this week possible, because there's way more to come, and I think you'll see a very good example of Turkish hospitality here. So, as Professor Ojai just mentioned when she closed, she asked the question, well, maybe we should be thinking about what's not being said and addressing the elephant in the room. Well, I thought, well, that is the perfect segue for me, because that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be convincing you, I hope, by the end of this talk, that what's not being said has such a profound effect on how people feel, on how people are treated, and how we can ultimately come to live together in this very complex social environment that we're all a part of. So when I started, I wrote a book, as Juliet was just mentioning, and when I started writing this book, I took a year off, and 7 years later, by the way, I finished it. But I took the first year off, and people would come up to me and say, "Oh, I heard you're writing a book. What are you writing on?" And I would say, "Well, I'm writing about dignity." And the immediate reaction that people gave was, "Oh, that is so important. I'm so glad you're doing it." And then they would say, follow up with a very quizzical look on their faces. They say, "But how can you fill an entire book about dignity? What is there to say?" And I thought about that, because I got that response so many times, and I realized therein lies the problem. This is an issue that is so important to each and every one of us, and yet we know very little about it. In fact, now, 10 years since the time I started thinking about dignity, I could write volumes about it. And I have this little book, 250-page book, which is the starting point. But honestly, it is the elephant in every room. Whenever there are tensions among people, either in an organization or in a community or in a country, or for that matter, even in a family, or for that matter, even within us individually, there are always underlying issues of dignity that need to be explored. So how did I come to appreciate the power of dignity and the role that it plays in our lives? Well, let me first set the stage by telling you about a trip I took, maybe 9 months ago. I went to Dublin, Ireland, and I was asked to give a series of talks on dignity. And the superintendent of police found out that I was in town, and he asked if I could come and have a talk with the people in his department who were working on a very special new program that they were developing, which was a program for migrant workers. So people who were coming in temporarily to work in in agriculture and so on, laborers. And so what he wanted me to do was to come and to comment on their program, to see if there wasn't something about dignity that they were missing, that they should address in it. And so I sat there very quietly, and the superintendent gave a beautiful presentation. Maybe there were 4 or 5 other people in the room. And after he finished, after about 40 minutes, he said, "Well, Donna, is there anything you would add to this?" And I was floored, because they did such a beautiful job. And I don't know where they got all of their research from, but they really understood how the experience of the migrant worker, and how in the past it had been so horrible. People had been treated so badly. And so this is why this new superintendent said, "We're going to put an end to this. We are not going to treat our migrant workers this way anymore." And so they established this program. And he said to me, so I said, "No, I have nothing to add. You've done a beautiful job. And in fact, I've learned something from you." And he said, to close, he said, you know, at the end of the day, it really boils down to one question. And what he said, the question is, how do we want to make people feel? How do we want to make people feel? And the fact is that we have the power to either make people feel really good, feel worthy, feel valued. We have the power to do that. But we also have the power to do the opposite. We have the power to make people absolutely miserable with our prejudice, with our negative judgments, with our, sense of superiority. We can do that, and we can do it in a nanosecond. So ever since I got back from Ireland, every single talk I give, I mention Jack Nolan and his insight and that simple question. And he said, start in the beginning of the day and ask yourself that question, how am I going to make people feel? And end the day by saying, how well did I do? So I think this issue of dignity is all about how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about the other, and how we feel actually about, a greater purpose in our lives, whether that's religion or whether that can be conceptualized some other way. It's really, dignity is about our connections to our own self-worth, our connections to the self-worth of other people, and our connection to something that's bigger than ourselves, however you want to define that. So that's just a preview, but I'm just amazed at the insight of that program in Ireland, and I have, it has been my challenge every day to answer that question, in a positive way, that is. So why dignity? Well, I started out, as was mentioned, I've been working in international conflict for about 25 years now, bringing parties together, and started out in the Middle East with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And then that was when I first started learning the methodology that we used, which was to try to bring parties in conflict together for discussions about the issues that divided them, rather than have them each separately try to figure out their own agenda. So we thought, well, let's give people an opportunity to sit together and hopefully jointly try to come up with some creative ideas. And these were always about the political issues. They were always the top leadership, certainly not the president necessarily, but people who were in tremendous positions of power and influence in the communities. So I would, for the first few years, and when I was conducting these, was a third party, I was very nervous about it, and because there's nothing, there's something very different about reading about a conflict, and then when you go and you sit with the communities and you experience their angst, you experience the despair, you experience the suffering that people are going through. It was really quite a powerful shift for me. So I would sit there and be very nervous, and so I spent a lot of time listening to what was really going on. Now, I'm a psychologist. I have, as was pointed out, I have a degree in psychology. It's actually political psychology because I had international relations thrown in there as well. But nonetheless, when we would be convening these dialogues, I would be listening for a different kind of conversation that was taking place. And there was always the different conversation, and it was the conversation of the elephant, all right? And they would be talking about, let's just say it was Israel-Palestine, but they would be talking about what to do with the refugees, or how to address the settlement issue in the capital. They would be discussing all of these objective issues, and all of a sudden something would happen, and I could see some of the participants just getting very upset, and they would kind of pull away from the table. You could see them withdraw. They would disengage from the conversation. And so I was watching for this, and it didn't matter where I was in the world conducting these dialogues, the same thing would happen. And so I started tuning in to those unspoken conversations. And I always think about them as occurring under the table, because they're in the room and they're filling up the room. And not only that, but they are derailing really productive conversations about how to resolve these issues. So if I were to put words to what that unspoken conversation, what the elephant was saying, it would be something like, how dare you treat us this way? Don't you see we're human beings? Can't you see how much we're suffering, how our families are suffering, how our communities are suffering? And I don't even remember where I was, but I remember at one point thinking, oh my gosh, we have to figure out how to address that underlying, that emotional riptide that was going through this room. And I emphasize the word emotional because they were emotional reactions to what was being said in the room. It's the how dare you reaction. And so I'm thinking, oh boy, what are we going to do? If I say to these high level, because they were all very, as I said, high powered leaders in the communities, if I were to say to them, well, tell me about a time when you felt emotionally wounded by the other side. Can you imagine how far we'd get with that conversation? Nobody wants to talk about emotions, right? Nobody wants to discuss being wounded or traumatized. That's a word that people hate even more. And so I'm sitting there one day and I'm thinking, okay, I have a feeling I know how to get to this. I have a feeling. And it was like one of these epiphanies, you know, how you have these big insights one day. And I said, this is about their dignity. The reason they're getting so upset is because their dignity has been violated and nobody's doing anything about it. Nobody's discussing it. And so I realized that this profoundly human, conversation that wasn't taking place had to be discussed at the top of the table instead of the borders, the refugees. Because my view now is that until those issues, that human dimension of conflict, until those injuries to our dignity are addressed, you're never going to find a lasting solution to these conflicts, because they're just going to keep popping up. So, because here's the thing, the work of dignity is actually quite simple. It's hard to do because we're working on an emotional level, but the fact is it's quite simple. People need acknowledgement for when they have suffered, when they've been treated badly. It is just to not have acknowledgement of your suffering. Those wounds stay on the inside and there's nowhere to go with it. So that's the story of how I got, how I used the term dignity and how I got to appreciate. And again, so I kept doing this little, analysis everywhere I went. I kept checking this out. Well, is this the same in Sri Lanka? Yes. Is this the same in Colombia with the people I worked with? Yes. Was this the same in Northern Ireland, in Africa, in Libya, all the places that I'd worked? And the answer was yes. So, okay, so what is it? Before we go any further, I want to be sure we're all on the same page, that we all understand my conceptualization of what dignity is. So, does anybody have any, what words come to mind when you think of the word dignity? Come on, you must have something.
Respect.
Yep, that's always the first one. Yep, anybody else? Mm-hmm. Okay, honor, right? Recognition is a big one, exactly, yeah. Sorry? Expectation? Acceptance, exactly, yes, acceptance. Well, anyway, and yes, please, go ahead. I can't hear you. Listening? Yes, that I heard, yeah. Okay, well, so when I was doing the research for this book, and I was looking for a real, powerful definition of dignity that matched up with my experience working with people all over the world, you know what? There really wasn't any agreed upon definition. And so I came up with my own that seemed to satisfy what people were asking for and what people were yearning for. And the very simple definition of dignity is that it's our inherent value and worth. I believe, every single one of us comes into the world valuable and worthy, every single one of us. And so the other thing, though, is that even though we are all born valuable and worthy, the other half of the equation, which is equally as important, is that we are also born vulnerable. We're vulnerable to having that dignity injured. So this is the sort of, it's almost like a tension between this in this definition, because here we are valuable, but yet we are equally as vulnerable to having our dignity wounded, just like we are vulnerable to having our physical bodies wounded and injured. Our dignity is also vulnerable. So if you have any question about, If you disagree with me that, well, it's far more complicated than value and vulnerability, take a look at this slide. I mean, is there any doubt in your mind that this infant has value and worth? I mean, think of your own, the children in your lives. And in fact, I think we would go a step further when we would say this baby, precious baby, is invaluable. It's priceless, and it's irreplaceable. So what do we do with something that's invaluable, priceless, and irreplaceable? What do we do with it? You treat it with the utmost care and attention, right? You don't go tossing this baby around, right? It's like, oh my gosh, this baby is so precious. So even though we have this and it's born and it's part of our DNA, it's not something that comes and goes. And this is a really important point that I'm going to make in a few minutes, that dignity is something that is part of our DNA. It doesn't come and go. But the thing of it is, we all have it. We're all born with it. But we're not born knowing how to act like it. So we have to learn this stuff. We have to learn how to treat each other. And in a minute, I'll say more about that. But I want to say tell you why I think there's a difference between dignity and respect. Dignity, I think, as I've just made the case, is something that we're all born with. It's part of us. Respect, on the other hand, we don't have to do anything to have dignity. Respect, on the other hand, I think is earned. Because people confuse these two things, and I think it's a major difference because of what, parties in conflict are always saying, we demand respect. I think what they really want is, what they're really yearning for is to be treated as a human being, to be treated with dignity. I think that's very, very different. Because when I say I respect someone, somebody has to go out of their way, do something special over and beyond. But every one of us deserves to be treated with dignity. And it's our internal barometer indicating how we feel about ourselves. And I'll tell you what, there's no greater source of suffering than being disconnected from our own dignity. Because when we let go of our own connection to our self-worth, that's when all kinds of terrible things happen. So I want to tell you about something that was, and it's the part that gets injured when we're treated as if we didn't matter. And this is the case for conflict resolution that I'm going to be making, that dignity is the glue that holds us together as human beings and in relationships. It's what makes relationships work. And the fact is, if indignity tears us apart in a fraction of a second, but dignity can be that glue that puts us back together again. I want to share a couple more things that I learned about dignity when I did my research for this book. And this was the thing that gave me so much hope about the power of this idea. All right, so this looks like a very strange slide, doesn't it? Well, what this is here for is because I discovered research, neuroscience research, that showed that when a person has an injury, like this, a physical injury, that it shows up in the brain, in this very ancient part of our brain. The neuroscientists have mapped all this out with these brain scanners, functional magnetic resonance imaging. But this is the powerful part, that they found that when dignity is violated, when a person has an injury to their dignity, it shows up in exactly the same area as a physical wound. So when we're being mistreated, when we're being insulted, when we're being dismissed, when we're being discriminated against, when we're being the object of prejudice and, as I said, discrimination, all of those dignity wounds show up in the brain as if we hurt ourselves physically. So I don't know about you folks, but this finding was so convincing to me that I was jumping for joy when I found this research, because I knew that this is the stuff that I could take on the road with me and tell all the high-powered leaders or the business executives or people in positions of power. I could convince them that dignity is important because science has given us the indication that this stuff really matters, right? Because here's the problem with these dignity violations that we endure. When you get a physical injury, you get this fancy cast, right? Everybody feels sorry for you. It's a wonderful thing. I remember when I was a little kid, I wanted to break an arm or something because my friend next door had one. She had everybody sign their names. And you remember those days when we had the cast? But when you have an injury to your dignity, you know, it just stays inside. We don't have an emergency room to go to. There's no, in the US we have something called a 911 call where you can call for emergencies and people will come, and these dignity wounds just stockpile, right? They just pile one on top of the other until one day something really bad happens. Let's say you get furious and, you know, let's use Libya for example, because I've just been there and I've been working with Libyans. You know, all of a sudden they just couldn't take this anymore, the oppression cut by the Gaddafi regime, and, you know, a revolution occurred. So this is what happens when people endure over time chronic violations of their dignity. Something terrible will happen. There'll be a violent reaction because this is just what human beings do. And there's all the science to back it up. So no 911 call, nowhere to go with it, but you know what? It needs to be taken care of. And I want to say one thing that, I'll tell you one story about Nelson Mandela, because he actually contributed significantly to my understanding of dignity. So before I started my research, I really believed that somebody had the power to take my dignity away from me. I believed it. You know, if someone treated me badly, I felt that was part of my reason for being so upset and depressed and feeling unworthy because somebody robbed me of my dignity. Well, I read this book by Nelson Mandela, his autobiography, and he told the story of when he went into Robben Island, you know, the prison that he was in for 27 years, and he said, I realized that I had to figure out immediately, once they first got into the prison, what the guards were up to. They had to figure out what the guards were up to because they knew if they could understand what the guards were up to, that they might be able to survive, figure out a way to survive. And he said within hours, they figured out that what the guards tried to do was strip them of their dignity. Okay, that's pretty typical for political prisoners. And then he said in the next breath, or in the next page, he said, but I was so happy to realize that because, I think, so happy to realize that. And he said, so happy because what I realized was that nobody is in charge of my dignity but me. I am the only one in charge of my dignity. They may assault my dignity, they may wound it, you know, and I might suffer the pain of having my dignity injured that way, but at the end of the day, it is always in my hands. And I don't know how many of you ever saw the movie Invictus. Did you ever see that story about Nelson Mandela? Well, he quotes a poem by a British 19th century poet saying, I'm the captain of my fate and the master of my soul. Nobody can touch my dignity. And I thought, wow, that helped me so much because when you know that there's nobody who can touch your worthiness, when you know deep in your soul that you are worthy no matter what, you can handle just about anything, right? You can withstand. Look what he did. You know, he withstood 27 years of indignity and degradation. He came out. This is what he looked like coming out. This was one happy man, right? This was a guy who was so resilient. And I'm telling you, I just spent the weekend with Archbishop Tutu in London, and we just had a conversation about this. And he confirmed my hypothesis that is what knowing that his dignity was always intact was what got him through the most oppressive years and the most heinous acts of indignity that you can imagine. And so this is a source of resilience, right? In our country, we're doing all kinds of resilience research, looking at how to make kids more resilient, you know, especially children who are at risk or people who had suffered a lot of whatever the trauma, the PTSD research. This is what can help people stay resilient, is knowing that your dignity is always, always, always in your hands. So that freed me up. I don't know. I'm hoping that that's going to be a ticket for you too if you ever have any doubt about your dignity. But you know, we had a conversation. Malia, where is she? We were having this conversation about these. I was explaining this research to her, and she said, "Well, but don't you have to heal those wounds of your dignity?" You've got to heal them, just like you have to put the cast on your arm. You have to heal from those wounds. And there's all kinds of ways of doing that. You have to, at first, very first thing is to tell your story about what happened to you and get acknowledgement for that. So if you keep it inside, it's poison to your system. So, and we can, for the next 3 days, we'll explore that in my group. But for now, I have to move on. I wanted to explain some research that I did once I identified this dignity, power of this concept of dignity. I went and asked people from all over the world, wherever I was doing some work. I would interview them and ask them, I would say, tell me a story about when you felt your dignity was violated. And I collected hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories from all different parts of the world. And I collected them, and I did an analysis of them. And lo and behold, no matter where I was, there was a universal theme to all of these violations of dignity. And of course, keep in mind, if you flip the coin over, it's how we experience an honoring of our dignity. So one of the very first element of what I'm calling the 10 elements of dignity, 10 ways in which we can have our dignity honored, and 10 ways that we want to be treated in order to be recognized as something of value and worth. The first one is acceptance of identity. Identity came up so many times here today. And in fact, I was thinking, I wanted to ask the panel in the last session about a new word that we can use. Tolerance, honestly, I've never liked that word. I've always agreed with the analysis that there's something so negative about it, like, oh yeah, I'm just going to tolerate you, right? And I think the another word that we could use in replacing tolerance is acceptance. It's simple, as Victor was saying. This is a simple word. And that's really what we want. We want acceptance. We don't want someone to just tolerate us, right? So acceptance of identity, this was the one that most people felt that they had been violated, whether it's because of your ethnic identity, because of your race, your religion, you've been treated as something as less than. So in order to honor somebody's dignity, that identity has to be accepted no matter who they are. And along with this is a recognition of people's unique qualities and way of life. So these things, these elements are all interrelated, as you'll see. But people want recognition. And it's also recognition, when I do this work in companies, it's recognition. People want to be praised for good work. People want a nice pat on the back and say, yeah, you did a really good job. Acknowledgement, well, I told you just a minute ago that one of the key elements in healing of our dignity wounds is getting acknowledgement when something bad happens to us. One of the dangers of the dignity injuries is that people get wounds to their dignity, and nobody tells them that it's horrible, it's wrong, it should never happen. And what ends up happening is that instead of thinking that something wrong has happened to you, you feel like there's something wrong with you. So the dignity work really at the essence is to explain that you're feeling bad not because you are bad, but you're feeling bad because something bad happened to you. And that liberates people. It makes them reclaim their sense of worth. The other element of dignity, and we talked about exclusion a lot earlier in the day, everybody wants to feel a sense of belonging. No matter whether it's to the state, to your community, to your group, whatever it is, it's the most awful feeling to feel excluded and left out on the margins. And so much of what the Jack Nolan did in Ireland with the migrant workers was to try to make them feel like a sense of belonging and inclusion while they were there for the short time. Well, this is the one that this element of dignity, safety, is the one that I work with the most, honestly, because safety, I'm not just talking about physical safety, but of course, in times of war, physical safety is a very big concern. But there's a psychological safety that's equally as important to people. They want to feel safe to be able to speak up if something bad happens to them. They don't want, like in the corporate world where I work, that when I did my interviews for this big Fortune 500 company, the most often cited dignity violation was that people didn't feel safe to speak up to their bosses when they were violating their dignity. They say to me, what do you mean? Because I would say, you have to talk to your boss and tell them that they're doing this and this is very hurtful to you. And these people would say to me, what are you, crazy, Donna? That would be career suicide. I can never speak up. And this is true on so many levels. It's also a safety from feeling humiliated, because there's nothing worse than feeling like we've been shamed or humiliated and treated as inferior or less than. That is it's a core violation of our dignity when we don't feel safe in our environment, either psychologically or physically. Well, we all know this one, fairness. We all have an inner barometer that goes off when we're not treated fairly. Even little kids know this, right? Little kids know this when their mother or their father gives them, let's say brother and sister are there and they're handed out candy. The first thing they do is, did I get the same amount? So we know fairness from the inside out. We have a deep appreciation for fairness. And by the way, this is the fairness when we're treated with, a sense of injustice. It is also the core of what fuels these international conflicts as well. Well, independence. None of us likes to feel like our freedom is restricted. We all want, we don't want to be micromanaged. We don't want somebody breathing over our backs, whether it's a government or whether it's our boss. We want to be free to express ourselves and to make decisions for ourselves. And see, this is a very insidious one, this understanding. As I said, I was in London with the Archbishop Tutu this last weekend, and he talked a lot about judgment. And judgment and prejudice are right there on the same continuum. So I'm going to elaborate on this for a second. And he would say, he said to us, we were sitting at dinner, and he said, one of the worst things that we do as human beings that seems to be a natural tendency for us is to make negative judgments when we don't have a full understanding of what's going on. So our default is to judge, right? Instead of saying, oh, if Victor has said something to me, this is Victor, by the way, folks. If Victor said something to me and I could see that he was judgmental. And so instead of Victor being judgmental immediately, all Victor would have to say to me is, gee, Donna, I don't really understand that point of view. Can you give me more information? Can you tell me a little bit more about why you feel that way? But we rush to judgment so fast. We rush to judgment. And I'm going to, his admonition to us was control that. Try to control that rush to judgment, because that is the fast track to prejudice. When we rush to judge, it's a fast track. And, I told him, I said, listen, I'm coming to Koch University to give a talk about prejudice and the role dignity can play. And he said, well, if your participants understand this, if they understand how lethal those judgments are, those quick snap judgments, you will be doing them a great favor. So I'm passing on that wisdom to you. And benefit of the doubt, this is actually quite connected. Because when here's the problem. Let's say you're in a relationship, or whether it's with another community or another conflict with another group, ethnic group, whatever, and you experience a lot of violations back and forth. Well, the first thing to go in that relationship is trust, right? You don't trust those people. You keep your sense of safety is threatened. So you're going to say, I'm not going to make myself vulnerable no matter what, right? So you never give them the benefit of the doubt. But guess what? Neuroscience has told us that people can actually read the mental states of others. So let's say that, somebody is not giving another person the benefit of the doubt. They can pick up on that there are things called mirror neurons that actually get activated when you feel that judgment. You can feel that negative judgment coming. And we used to call that intuition. But now neuroscience is telling us it's real. So if you give people the benefit of the doubt, even if you have to fake it, right, in the beginning, even if you have to fake it, they will pick up on that, and that will shift the dynamics in the relationship. I just think that's astonishing. I don't know about you. Okay, finally, accountability. Well, you know what? We're all going to mess up. We're all going to violate each other's dignity. It's as natural as anything. In fact, it's not natural to know, as I said earlier, it's not natural to know how to honor people's dignity. We definitely have to learn it. And, I'm the first to admit that they say you study the thing that you really need the most. Well, I think I needed to learn about how to treat people with dignity. And so it's something that we have to work at. And when we do violate somebody's dignity, thank goodness we have the option to say, I'm sorry, right? We have the option to apologize. But it is so hard, isn't it? I mean, when you're in a struggle with your significant other, your spouse, your partner, and you're right, you have this profound need to be right, and you don't want to admit you made a mistake. How we handle mistakes, I think, is the best barometer of how good we are at honoring each other's dignity. Because if we have the humility to say, I messed up, I made a mistake, and go to the person and say, I'm really sorry. I'm really, really sorry. It's like drinking vinegar sometimes. My husband and I get into these spats, and I thought, I don't want to do this, but I know I have to. So apology and accountability is really the final act of honoring dignity as I see it. So I'm about out of time, and I want to just tell you one story about Archbishop Tutu, since I was just with him, and I was reminded of it when I was with him. He, I think, I don't know if the introduction mentioned it, but I was asked to be a part of a panel of facilitators that brought together victims and perpetrators of the Northern Ireland conflict for encounters. Those of you who read my book, you know this story. But what you don't know is that, so we had one situation where we had a victim and a perpetrator, and the first day we were sitting there for hours, 8 hours filming this thing, and because it was made into a television program. And by the end, of the 8 hours, we were walking outside. Oh, and Archbishop Tutu was the facilitator along with me and another woman. And we walked out of the studio. And some of the producers, the BBC producers, said, you know what, maybe we should sit and debrief the session. Because we've got 6 more to go, and we should figure out what we did right, what we did wrong, like that. And so, the rest of us said, yeah, okay. And we were wiped out. But we said, yeah, okay, we can do that. And the Archbishop turns around and he said, don't you dare do that. He said, don't you dare. Oh my gosh, we were taken aback. Why not? Why shouldn't we? We thought we were being so responsible. And he said, there is enough negative energy in this house, because they took place in a house. He said, there is enough negative energy here in this house that will last last for the next 2 weeks that we are here. Our task is to balance out that negative energy with positive energy. And so he looks at his watch and he said, okay, he said, in an hour, I want you all downstairs. We're going to go into the living room, and we're going to play music. We're going to sing. We're going to dance. We're going to have cocktails. And he said, because if we don't put that kind of antidote into the room, we're never going to make it for the next 2 weeks. And we're all standing there like, oh my God, okay, we'll do that. We'll have fun. Yeah, sure, we'll have fun. And then, so then he walks up the stairs and he giggles. I don't know any of you who know him or have seen him. He has this very funny giggle. He walks up the stairs and he turns around to us, and by the way, we're still standing there kind of, stunned. And he said, and don't you ever forget, there's one last thing. And we said, yes. And he said, don't you ever forget that it's our duty to be joyful. It's our duty to be joyful. And I'll pass that on to you, because for those of us, all of us in this room, for one reason or another, are working on these very difficult issues. We're all dealing with human suffering at every turn in our work, all of us. And we forget sometimes that the greatest gift that we can give to others is to experience joy. So I'm going to end with that. and ask you if there's anybody who has any questions. We have a few minutes, I think, don't we? We have a few minutes for comments or questions. So please, anybody who would like to. All right, folks, somebody's got to be brave. Yes.
Thank you very much. Again, very interesting.
Wait. Sorry. Wait. Oh my, I can't believe I forgot this. Watch this. This is the Archbishop Tutu being joyful. This is when he accepted his Nobel Prize. He jumped up on the stage like that. I swear to you. Okay. Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Go ahead. But that was the pièce de résistance, and I forgot it. Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of how you work with people who feel that their dignity has been compromised? What type of techniques, what type of strategies, what type of approaches?
Well, I'll tell you what we're doing in Libya, because I just did a project in Rome, and we're developing what we call dignity healing testimony. Dignity healing testimony. And we brought young leaders from Libya to Rome to learn how to interview people who had been, experienced a lot of dignity violations. So we equipped them with little iPhones with a camera thing, and we got them to video the storytelling, because all the research says that unless people get these stories out and talk about the violations, unless they can talk about them and get some kind of public acknowledgement for their suffering, then the wounds will just stay there. That no healing will happen. This is the fundamental piece, and this is so relevant to Colombia. And so we equipped people to go into the communities. We taught them. We did a sort of training of the trainer approach, where we taught them how to do the interview. And what that meant was that they learned the 10 elements of dignity. By the way, Sedef, did you bring those, the elements of dignity? Remember I sent you the... What? Oh, I meant for these, anyway, never mind, that's okay. I meant to give you a list of these elements, and then there's another thing too. But so we would get them to memorize basically these elements of dignity and to understand how to use them. How do you honor, how do you acknowledge somebody's identity who's been so terribly treated? So what kind of discussion do you have with them? How do you bring out that, what happened to them, what their ways in which they had been violated? You let them tell the stories. And how were you treated? Were you treated fairly? No, my God. Did you feel like you were understood? Never understood. So it gave them very concrete ways of thinking about why they feel so terrible after having been a victim of so many violations. And honestly, this healing testimony, it's so powerful, because there's something about, and it's not just Libya, it's everywhere that I've done these healing testimonies. People, when they see themselves being videoed, because we give them the video, it goes to them. We don't do anything with it, but it goes to them so that they can have it, they can take it back into their community, show their friends and their colleagues and so on. But there is a sense of cleansing, there's a sense of being rid of that toxicity by seeing yourself being treated so well by the interviewer, right? And also you have it right there on a video, and it sort of externalizes the issues. It takes it from the inside and brings it out, and you can take a look at the trauma, you can take a look at the violations, and then it just makes so much more sense. This is why I felt so horrible, so diminished, you see. And it's so powerful. I mean, I can't even begin to do justice to it. I mean, it would be great if you could see one, but I don't feel it's so private that most people don't want it seen, but that's what we do. It's one of the things. There's many things, but that's one. Yeah. Yes. Either one.
Yes, I wonder if there are a set of skills or tricks next to being aware of the traps to violate someone else's or your own dignity.
Yeah.
Is there a guide how to resist those primal response to retaliate?
You're going to be in the workshop, right?
Yes.
It'll be answered in the next 3 days, I promise you. But the
All
answer
right.
is yes. The answer is yes. And most of this, as I said right from the beginning, that these are, when it comes to the 10 temptations to violate your own dignity, because I didn't show you that because I knew I wouldn't have time, but what the literature in evolutionary psychology has shown us is that we have immediate responses to when we are experiencing threat, all right? And these are things that come from our evolutionary legacy, because these are survival instincts that have come from way back when we were evolving as a human being. And one of the things, and many of these survival instincts are really destructive to relationships. You protect yourself, but the effect that it has on relationships is very, very powerful, negatively powerful. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. So for example, like when somebody comes at you in a threatening way, the first temptation that I describe is don't take the bait, right? Don't take the bait. Don't let the bad behavior of someone else determine how you're going to act. So restraint, when it comes to dealing with all of these temptations to violate your own dignity, restraint is the thing that we have to use the most, right? I mean, but I wanted to tell our colleagues about, somebody asked about the sources of prejudice, the roots of prejudice. I was shocked when I was introduced to the literature on evolutionary psychology. And I don't know, are many people here familiar with it? Evolutionary biology and psychology? I mean, it's not that well known. I mean, even at Harvard, where I am, and Columbia University, where I teach, there aren't courses that are offered in this. To me, this is the cutting edge in our understanding of xenophobia, of prejudice, because it's these self-protective instincts that get triggered when we are under circumstances of threat. And the other and this us and them framing of the world, the way we do it, especially under circumstances of threat, that had that had survival value. The problem is all these instincts have stayed in us. And so the key to understanding how to, stop this cycle of indignity is understanding that we have these instincts to begin with and how destructive they can be. And to, like you said, to learn the skills, how to stop yourself. How do you stop yourself? And there's a whole discussion about that, but yeah. Yes.
I've been almost 10 years ago involved in bringing together Israeli and Palestinian youth in the Netherlands, and those encounters were extremely powerful, and they really gained more understanding for each other's feelings and needs.
Yeah.
And they even set up their own program in Israel and Palestine where they would meet regularly.
Great.
Now comes the questions. Because of the political reality, it seems they lost hope also in each other again. So how do you deal with people who lost hope through all the things they experience in their own environment?
Well, I think the first thing that you do is acknowledge that what they're that's real, that it's understandable why they would lose hope, right? It's not, I'm just saying, first acknowledge that that's what they're experiencing. I mean, the problem is, of course, you can work at the interpersonal level here with all of these skills and building how you talk to other people, how you treat yourself and all of that. But when you have the structures, the political structures that are filled with indignity, that's going to be a problem, right? Because what's happening is it's the larger political structures that are creating the hopelessness. It's not the way they're interacting with each other. So the big question for me is, how do you keep the sense of, hope, I guess, is that the word you use, hope? How do you keep this sense of positivity and excitement about the relationship? How do you keep that alive in the face of all of these, more settlements being built, or, somebody kidnapping a young Israeli child? I mean, so there's always things on both sides that are going to jeopardize the good work that you've done. But, you just have to hang in there. I've done that work and that conflict for so many years, and I don't, frankly, honestly, if you really want to know my opinion about it, I don't think we're going to see an end to that in our lifetime. So anything that you can do to sort of pay it forward, any sense of, especially for young people, because they're the ones who are going to be left with the, with the rubble. So I would say just keep with them, stay with them, acknowledge how hard it is, but just keep that spirit alive that you created in the Netherlands. Yeah. Because you know what? You are going to be the repository of hope for them. When they lose hope, you, the third party, the person's coming in that was, help working with them in the past, they're going to look to you. And if you're hopeless, forget it. So you got to stay positive yourself. I don't know if that's what you wanted to hear, but yeah.
There's much more to say about it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. To be continued. Yeah. Okay.